In this first Berserker Khazan review, we'll take an in-depth look at the first ever single-player ARPG set in the Dungeon & Fighter universe, developed by Neople and published by Nexon, and decide whether this team's first Souls-like has delivered on the expectations it generated from its highly praised demo that came out earlier this year. In the first Berserker Khazan, you play as Khazan, a warrior of the Pellos Empire who rose through the ranks to become a great general, and alongside his best friend Ozma, the Great Mage, they vanquished Hismar, the Berserk dragon that threatened their land, and gained their status as heroes of the Empire. But the Emperor envied their fame, and thus framed the very people who protected the Empire and charged them with treason. Khazan was then brutally tortured, his tendons severed, and exiled to the snowy mountains of Mount Heinmach. Fate intervenes when an avalanche disrupts his transit, and in that moment, a being known as the Blade Phantom merges with him in an attempt to take over his body. From here, Khazan manages to form a pact with the Blade Phantom in exchange for helping him with his mission, and the Blade Phantom grants Khazan the strength necessary to enact revenge against those who had wronged him in return. The concept of an inner demon that we see the protagonist control is a trope I've mostly only encountered in anime and one television show. It really appeals to me since it allows the opportunity for both character development and interesting interactions between the two distinct personalities sharing one body. Khazan and the Blade Phantom execute the dynamic quite well, and their partnership is engaging because they have such opposing personalities. Blade Phantom looks down on human connection and heroism, whereas Khazan is the very embodiment of those ideals. However, in terms of character growth, Khazan and Blade Phantom don't change throughout the story, and unfortunately, this is the same for many other characters as well. Additionally, the side characters introduced into the narrative always had one moment of importance, only to be sidelined when they could have had an interesting spotlight given their intriguing origins and their skills. Once you progress further into the game, you experience many twists and turns, some of which genuinely surprised me and made me feel sympathetic towards some characters. The story stays engaging throughout, all the way to the climax where mysteries are unveiled, which is only elevated by fantastically executed visuals and gameplay. The fact that it's a revenge story focused on the climax of the Pellos Empire is also a nice bonus, since Souls-likes generally explore the aftermath of a great civilization falling, so the main objective of Khazan's story is somewhat different when compared to other Souls-likes. One more note on the story I think is worth mentioning is that the game adds a full character relationship map accessible from any Blade Nexus. This adds additional info for all the characters you've met, displaying their allegiance, and adds info to their biography as the game goes on, which I found was a nice touch for anyone like me who wanted a deeper dive into the characters. The setting of the Dungeon & Fighter universe also plays a huge role in the narrative and overall atmosphere of the game, consisting of the existence of mages, powerful dragons, reptilian dragonkin, Sempo temple monks, giant yeti monsters, a ruler of the underworld, and much, much more. The world building also shaped the world around Khazan, like the dragonkin race and their newfound grudge against humanity after the defeat of Hismar, which is shown in the aftermath of dragonkin and human wars in some missions. The Netherworld and its hierarchy is also touched upon as an important origin story for the Blade Phantom, which the game will reveal in later stages. Overall, the story and setting of the first Berserker Khazan is engaging from start to finish, with an interesting story not commonly told in video game format that feels fresh, and the Dungeon & Fighter setting executed in a way that anyone could understand. Unfortunately, character development is lacking, and some characters I would have liked to see more of were not expanded upon beyond their initial moments of glory, but the setting and the mysteries behind the plot kept me immersed the whole way. Although the first Berserker Khazan does offer an immersive story, the game definitely places much more emphasis on gameplay, streamlining some of the basic Souls-like mechanics to attract a wider audience while drawing significant inspiration from several Souls-like titles, especially Nioh. The strongest aspect of Khazan is the combat system, which is arguably one of the best we've seen in the last couple years of gaming, perhaps only rivaled by Stellar Blade. To begin, let's delve into the game's core structure and level design. It would not be a stretch to say that the first Berserker Khazan takes a lot of inspiration from other titles when it comes to the fundamental gameplay structure and level design. The main hub, known as the Crevice, exists in between the Netherworld and the Mortal Realm, serving as your fast travel point to missions. To travel, you interact with a Phantom Gate, which opens a map to the region along with mission details, recommended levels, and unlocked collectibles. Once you complete all main missions in the region, you unlock the staircase leading to the next Phantom Gate in the Crevice, and you repeat this loop for the full game. This hub structure is very akin to the Nexus from Demon's Souls with its arched zones, while the mission selection is straight out of Nioh 2, which actually blends surprisingly well. This combination brings out the best of both games, the Demon's Souls style hub with the arched zones that allows you to feel more connected with the NPCs and offers a sense of safe haven, while the Nioh 2 style maps and missions provide clarity with mission info and segmentation, breaking the game into manageable objectives for players with limited time. However, I do wish the hub had more hidden elements or loot, as secrets and treasures always seem to be key elements in the Souls series, but the crevice ends up feeling quite lackluster on that front. As for the actual missions in the game and level design, Khazan deceives you by starting incredibly linear and quite boring, but slowly and gradually eases into more complex and longer missions with verticality, shortcuts, missable content, and even hidden walls and secret bookshelf doors. Levels are often heavily inspired by multiple Souls-like titles such as the Burning Villages from Nioh, Sen's Fortress and an Orlando from Dark Souls, or even classic Miyazaki Poison Swamps. Collectibles are also present throughout levels, with a few breakable red gems that can be exchanged for bonuses, and later on, Jarlings, who are showing off their Nioh inspiration loud and proud with zero shame, as they operate much the way Kodama did. There are even remnant corpses that have dialogue when you interact with them, and missions always end with a signature boss and a mission completed, so the devs may just be the biggest Nioh fans in the gaming industry. If I were to compare level designs between this game and other Souls-likes, I would say this game reaches somewhere around a Demon's Souls level at its peak, which is unfortunately only the final 2 regions of the game. For a few missions, I can confidently say that it was an experience different from any other Souls-like. As for the rest though, it felt like I already knew all the tricks and traps from other titles they had been inspired by. This doesn't mean I didn't enjoy them though, as they were still very fun and were executed nearly flawlessly, which is quite impressive for a company that has never created an ARPG, never mind a Souls-like. Overall, the game structure is quite cleverly done, and mission level design starts weak but ends off very strong. Perhaps a bit too much inspiration was taken for the levels, but they were still very enjoyable nonetheless. Moving on from the game structure, let's finally talk about what we're all here for, the combat. The combat in this game is filled with tons of fresh ideas that would belong in a Devil May Cry title, instead sneaking its way into a Souls-like game, and the results speak for themselves. The gameplay feels visceral with top-notch animation, sound effects, and hit-stop frames that all culminate in excellent, satisfying combat, which almost turns the game into a hack and slash. However, the patience required from bosses will humble you if you treat the game as such, forcing you to get good with parries and or dodging to truly master Khazan. They even have special burst counter moves, again straight out of Nioh, which are also very satisfying and rewarding. Khazan has found a nice balance between the patience required from the player and the aggressive tools given to them so that fights aren't too fast from players spamming and not respecting enemies, or too slow from excessive enemy attacks that heavily punish you. At the core of customization for the combat is of course leveling up. You'll acquire a Netherworld essence called Lacrima from corpses, defeating enemies and bosses that you can then use to level your stats, which aren't very different from other Souls-like titles. Additionally, you heal with Netherworld energy that replenishes at every checkpoint you activate. There are 3 different weapon types you can choose from in the game: the dual wield, which has short range but swift and nimble attacks, the great sword with its hard-hitting and defensive moves, and the spear with long reach and insane multi-hit combos. All of these weapons have vastly different playstyles that completely change how you play Khazan, and almost make it look entirely different from one weapon to the other. At the core of this system is the skill tree, where there are very distinct skills and passive bonuses for each weapon, and a common skill tree for universal skills and passives. The engine of this system is Spirit, a resource you gain by attacking enemies and perfectly pairing them, which you can use to activate skills that you've unlocked in the skill tree. Skills will either be baked into your weapon combo, or be a separate input costing Spirit, or be part of a weapon move that also costs Spirit. It's very easy to start picking your favorites based on the feel and effectiveness by just trying skills and moves out on enemies, and then changing around skill points with no additional cost to try others. The only problem I would say with this skill tree system is that some skills will be fundamentally stronger than others, such as your charged heavy attack getting a damage boost, or just getting extra reach and a combo added on. But the game resolves any of these issues by also incorporating sets and skills acquired from full set bonuses from your gear. Gear in this game includes your weapon, helm, armor, gloves, leggings, boots, ring, and necklace. The only difference between the gear that you pick up are the set it's related to and the random attributes it rolls. You'll never find a weapon with higher attack damage than another, assuming that it drops at the same level in rarity. So the build customization in this game is generally from your chosen set and those random attributes. You can mix and match sets, but to acquire skills from the set, you generally need between 5 to 8 pieces. I won't be showing any of those acquired skills here because a huge part of the fun is just discovering them yourself, but I will say from personal experience that they are probably the flashiest, most powerful skills in the game, and I had tons of fun just discovering the different set skills by crafting them all. You can also equip Phantoms, which gives some passive buffs to your character to support your chosen skills, and these can be upgraded with discoverable items and XP as you progress the game. All in all though, there is honestly not a ton of customization, which results in rather weak build variety. It's very streamlined to just be attribute bonuses, sets, phantom skills, and stats. Streamlining is not necessarily a bad thing, but to some extent, it does harm replayability and narrow the scope of possible builds. Overall, though, it's complex enough to keep you invested in your build every time you return to the crevice after a mission. The highlight is the secret skills you find on sets. Lastly, for gameplay, let's talk about enemy variety. The pool is quite sizable, with over 80 different enemies spread across your playthrough, with almost all of them boasting a unique moveset. There's also an arachnophobia mode to turn your spiders into creepy robots if you want, which I found pretty funny. There will sometimes be elite enemies in a mission featuring a base enemy in Frenzy with extra health, and true to form, there are some very annoying enemies that will grow on you, just like our favorite Death Basilisks from Dark Souls. In terms of bosses, the main mission bosses are all unique and incredibly well designed. I spent hours doing no damage runs for most of them because it's just that fun. For the bonus missions, bosses are decent, being creative outtakes of the main bosses, and other times just being weaker copies of them. Moving on to design, the first Berserker Khazan is practically perfect in terms of optimization, with my game running at a very smooth 90 FPS on all max settings at 1440p, with an NVIDIA 3090 and an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. The graphics of the game are decent, but the real star of the show is the art style, with very good looking cel-shaded characters and a perfect bleak color palette to nail the feeling of a gritty revenge story, heavily emphasizing the colors of black and red when interacting with anything related to the Netherworld or using skills in combat. In terms of audio, the soundtracks are great. They aren't on the level of Lies of P or Stellar Blade, but they work in making me hyped up for boss fights or dispirited when facing tragedy. The English voice acting is stellar, with well-known industry professionals who you probably know of making an appearance. Primarily Anthony Howell, who plays Margit in Elden Ring as Blade Phantom, Ben Starr, who plays Clive Rosfeld in Final Fantasy XVI as Khazan, and Holly Earl as Lilia from League of Legends playing Defrona. Just a few minor issues are keeping the design of Khazan from being perfect. Emphasizing the red leaves, some missions and areas seem washed out when exploring, which could be a design choice since the story is a bleak tragedy, but is still somewhat off-putting. Additionally, there were a few minor bugs in my playthrough, and there were a few rare frame drops in the last couple of missions, perhaps from 90 to 50 or 60 or so, but it didn't really impact gameplay at all. A player completely new to Souls-like games may take around 80 hours to beat the game on the normal difficulty, but the average Souls-like player will likely beat the game in around 40 hours and collect everything in 20, making the total 60 hours for a completionist playthrough. The limitations on gameplay customization do harm that replayability somewhat, but playing with a different weapon will feel like a completely different experience. There's also a new game plus with additional items and loot to find, so a second playthrough is probably a must, but a third would be a stretch. When considering a game's price point, we take into account the amount of content available, the experience, impact, and the value of purchasing a game right away versus waiting for patches or a sale. Priced at $59.99 USD on both console and PC, the first Berserker Khazan is well worth your money for such a high production value product with some real passion behind it. You can tell these devs must have spent months analyzing and picking apart all the different Souls titles they took inspiration from, and though their first attempt may not have much unique from these titles, it's a fantastic starting point for their future games. Final thoughts. The first Berserker Khazan has been on my wishlist for over a year now. I remember being incredibly hyped to play the moment I saw the cel-shaded Souls-like trailer that almost looked like a Berserk game coming to life. So has the game lived up to the hype in my eyes? I would say absolutely yes. The game has everything I expected and wanted it to have. A dramatic and slightly edgy revenge story, visceral combat that feels like a fast-paced expanded version of Sekiro, and a fantastic art style with cel shading to give it that manhwa anime aesthetic. Despite having interesting characters who make hardly any appearance and the lack of character development from Khazan and Blade Phantom, I still found myself enjoying the story for its plot-driven narrative, serving as an incentive enough to keep pushing forward through all the tough obstacles you face in the game. The excellent technical and visual aspects carry the main story with fantastic boss designs and effects that make climactic moments feel exceptionally dramatic. These bosses are also the most fun content the game has to offer, which was the main thing I was looking for in Khazan. It's just a shame that customization and thus replayability are slightly lacking, since I always found myself craving to spend more time in the crevice tinkering with my build, but I'm sure this could be expanded upon in future titles or maybe even a DLC. The big budget from the Dungeon & Fighter series really shows in this title, and it's an extremely solid game for $59.99, easily making it my second favorite game this year so far, just behind Monster Hunter Wilds. I highly recommend you grab this day one if you're a fan of titles such as Sekiro, Devil May Cry 5, or Nioh.
you.